Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice.
No speaker, no anything, nothing else, no one else could do, and that is bring Americans together.
Together and in prayer.
Yep. Thank you very much. Good to hear from you. Let's head to EW in Mesquite. You're on KRLD.
Good morning, Ernie. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for calling.
The religious zealots that were here that did this, all they know is force. The only solution is to level Baghdad.
The question, though, is you want to make sure you get the right people. You want to make sure you get the people who are directly involved with this.
But they don't care if it's the right people. They care about body count. You start with Baghdad, and then you go to Gaddafi.
EW, thanks for your call. This is Ernie Brown. We'll continue your calls about the terrorist bombings on the East Coast coming up on News Radio 1080 KRLD.
One place to begin the search for answers is among piles of charred and twisted steel, now lying in a scrapyard in New Jersey.
Some cladding up there that looks like it had been in a fire.
Gene Corley is leading a team from the...
This 8-ton steel I-beam is 6 inches thick. It was selected to be preserved for future generations for the near-perfect horseshoe-like bend formed during the collapse.
I found it hard to believe that it actually bent because of the size of it and how there's no cracks in the iron. It bent without almost a single crack in it. It takes thousands of degrees to bend steel like this.
Typically you'd have buckling and tearing on the tension side, but there's no buckling at all.
We were all in this little pocket in this stairway between the 4th and the 2nd floor. And this unbelievable sound, I still remember the sound of steel, these massive steel beams that are roughly 5 feet deep, twisting around us like they were little twist ties off a loaf of bread. I'll never forget it.
Some cladding up there that looks like it had been in a fire.
Gene Corley is leading a team from the American Society of Civil Engineers investigating the precise causes of the collapse. Corley led led the investigation of the Oklahoma City bombing disaster. But the magnitude and relevance of this investigation is daunting.
I have looked at now 2 major terrorist attacks, and I never want to look at another one in the future. I want the findings that we have obtained from these studies to be used to develop buildings that will provide more safety for those who are in them.
Knowing how the towers collapsed does not fully explain what specific components failed. For that, the investigators needed to examine the remains of the buildings.
First numbers identify which building it's in.
Most steel components had locator numbers stamped on the surface.
Part of the column extended from floor 39 to 41.
If those numbers survive, investigators can actually pinpoint where each piece of steel came from, even in this surreal and mangled pile. Controlling the fire was also hopeless. It was too high up and spread over too big an area. Had firemen even reached the blaze, the equipment they carried would have made very little difference.
But before they could get the man to safety, the North Tower toppled. They ran for their lives.
16 acres held many souls and many secrets. Gene Corley, the engineer who was in charge of the federal inquiry into the destruction of the World Trade Center site, was ready to reveal his findings. He had formed a data collection team comprised of the nation's leading structural engineers and fire protection experts. For 6 months, they worked to understand the sequence of mechanical failures that brought the towers down. Their investigation included a careful inspection of steel columns from the towers that were brought to scrapyards.
One of the things that we were interested in was to determine how hot the fire was in the tower prior to collapse. The way to determine that is to find pieces of steel that were involved in the fire, but had not been damaged further by the fire that occurred after the collapse.
But finding the right pieces of steel required detective work. Clues came from the original construction workers who coded each piece of steel that they hoisted into position on the towers, marking its location in the structure. This procedure is not unusual, but it was done with particular diligence at the World Trade Center.
Every piece of steel had the number stamped in showing exactly where it went in the building.
Corley's team placed each piece of steel under the microscope to reveal its grain structure.
Under the microscope, the metallurgist can look at it and tell us a great deal about what's happened to it in the fire.
By studying abnormalities in the steel's grain structure, investigators determined how hot the metal became, and thus learned what parts of the steel columns failed first.
Very similar to using lighter fluid on a charcoal fire. It ignites the charcoal and then burns out. Its main role was to ignite other combustibles and really start the whole space burning at once.
Had been so weakened by fire that when a corner of the 80th floor collapsed, it started a chain reaction.
The collapse occurred by first the exterior columns buckling outward, and then As they buckled outward, the tower began to come down on the east side and it tilted. And then after it had tilted a little bit, the entire top of the building started moving straight down, and it all collapsed straight
additional
down.
trusses would have been weakened or dislodged, and fireproofing everywhere would have been obliterated.
Once the plane hit, and the fragments of the plane came through the building, we know it knocked out floors. We also know that it knocked spray-on fireproofing off a lot of components. Once you lose the spray-on fireproofing, you have bare steel. Once you have bare steel, you don't have a fire rating anymore.
Let me know when you see fire.
When you did it previously, you showed that the floors actually pancaked. And we did not see any evidence of pancaking in the videos or photographs we have.
It was just clearly sunlight. Maybe it was about 12 inches wide, and it was all peppered with this dirt and debris and running through it. But it was the most beautiful sight in the world. It's almost hard to believe the sunlight coming. I mean, this is a 110-story building fell down on top of us, and I'm on the third floor looking at sunlight.
Remarkably, none of the survivors were seriously injured. They were all given first aid as soon as they came out. Nova depicted a scenario envisioned by many experts at the time, that the truss connections failed in the extreme heat, causing the floors to fall onto one another, precipitating the collapse.
Forensic experts speculated that some victims may have been vaporized if they were on the floors where the airplanes penetrated. Still, the search for remains continued.
At 2:30 p.m., the first group to be rescued from Stairway B began to make their way across the treacherous debris field of the ruins of the World Trade Center.
There was no solid footing there. This was just twisted, bent up beams. Some were cut, there was sharp edges, but there was nothing solid.
All that dust that was created from this collapse made the steel very, very slippery. If you put your foot on it, it was almost like talcum powder.
Glenn Rowan and his Ladder 43 crew were one of the first rescue teams sent out to try and find the Stairway B survivors.
We're walking across this debris field, and it was pretty hazardous area.
Approximately 10 iron workers to assist in offloading. A large forklift which can take a capacity of approximately 50 tons.
K Airport, where it was wrapped, archived by the Vorsanger team, and stored. Eventually, it will be distributed to museums.
Put it on top of the plastic tarp and wrap it up to try and protect it from the elements, the rain. Not that it already hasn't been through enough, but we don't want it to deteriorate any more than it already has.
To be at ground zero of the World Trade Center attack is like stepping into some epic disaster movie. Dramatic, awful, larger than life, as though teeming with a cast of thousands on a Hollywood movie set. If only it were so. It is surreal, and television cannot do justice to the noise, the choking air, and the sheer scale of the dusty and mangled ruins. All 16 acres of it.
The fuel served to flash start the fire on several floors instantaneously. And since sprinkler piping in the core was completely destroyed, there was no water to slow down the blaze. Even worse, when the core was struck, the building's 3 emergency exits were also destroyed. So 950 people above the impact became trapped with no way out of the glowing inferno.
20,000 body parts found. The remains of more than 1,100 of the 2,823 victims identified.
Is it hard to see this stuff now taken away, to be cut up for scrap, or to go off to a museum?
We feel very strongly that this stuff should be shared with the public because it did affect the public.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
John Astor's office.